every day on the Northwestern was the happiest day of my life.
Guys, you have officially hit your number, and we got it on the last string.
It's gonna be hard to catch all that crab that tight unless you're on a big pile.
With almost 60 pots already pulled and loaded, Jake's crew thought they were heading towards a huge payday. They'd pushed further northwest than ever, gambling for the motherlode of crabs. And it worked. The nets were fuller than anyone dared to dream, easily 200, maybe 300 crabs in a single haul. For a few hours, it was like all their hard work had finally paid off. Then the weather turned, fast. The wind picked up, the rain turned sideways, and what was once a promising day quickly became a life-and-death struggle. They knew they had to hurry up, finish their work, and return home to their families. But it wasn't just the wind, something else was about to go terribly wrong. A terrible accident has left the Deadliest catch family grieving a devastating loss. One of their bravest fishermen paid the ultimate price in the dangerous fight against the sea. The crew was caught in a deadly storm, and what started as a routine haul quickly turned into a fight for survival. How could something so routine turn so tragic? Let us uncover what really happened in those terrifying final moments that will make you fear the ocean like never before. With almost 60 pots already pulled and loaded, Jake's crew thought they were heading toward a huge payday. They pushed further northwest than ever, gambling for the motherlode of crabs, and it worked. The nets were fuller than anyone dared to dream, easily 200, maybe 300 crabs in a single haul. For a few hours, it was like all their hard work had finally paid off. Then the weather turned fast. The wind picked up, the rain turned sideways, and what was once a promising day quickly became a life-and-death struggle. They knew they had to hurry up, finish their work, and return home to their families. But it wasn't just the wind, something else was about to go terribly wrong. Before we go any further, it's clear this accident was far more devastating than anyone could have prepared for. And what came next will leave you completely stunned. Captain Jake's excitement turned to worry as a strange beep echoed from the sonar. It wasn't a sound they were used to, and it got everyone's attention. Jake knew the sea's signals well enough to understand that when something feels wrong, you don't ignore it. He ordered his crew to prepare for the worst. That anchor cable needed to stay tight, or the winch could rip clean off the ship, which would spell disaster. Jake's hands were tied. His main concern now was trying to keep everyone safe. The situation on deck went from bad to worse in no time. The rain was relentless, the waves smashing the boat like a giant fist. Jake gave orders like a man trying to outshout the storm itself. The most dangerous spot on deck became the winch. If the cable snapped, anyone standing near it would be in serious trouble. Jake's warnings grew more desperate. One of the deckhands almost went overboard when the cable got caught, jerking suddenly. It was the kind of moment that made everyone freeze in terror for a split second. They had all seen enough men go overboard to know that it's often the last anyone sees of them. Then, as if the sea wasn't trouble enough, another ship came creeping dangerously close. It was the Wizard. Captain Jake had seen her many times before, but not like this. Not this close, and not in a storm like this. It seemed like a collision was unavoidable. The crews of both ships braced for impact, and you could feel the panic. The waves heaved, and the two vessels barely missed crashing into each other. But while they avoided a direct hit, it was close enough to leave everyone rattled. Jake couldn't deal with the Wizard's captain right then. He had a whole crew relying on him to make the right decisions, to get them back to port in one piece. But no matter how experienced a captain you are, there are moments when the ocean just doesn't care. One wrong move, one slip on the wet deck, and tragedy strikes. A crew member lost his footing. And the next thing anyone knew, he was gone. The freezing cold of the Bering Sea swallowed him up in seconds, and the crew could only stare in horror. They had pulled up a haul bigger than anything they'd seen before, but it didn't matter anymore. In one heart-stopping moment, the reality of their dangerous life came crashing back. Jake and his crew knew they had to keep going, but the mood on the ship had darkened. The high of catching so many crabs meant nothing compared to the low of losing a man. Jake tried to keep them moving, shouting orders, keeping them focused, but everyone knew something had changed. Each wave that hit the ship felt like it was mocking them. When you're at sea, you don't have time to process grief. You have to keep moving, keep working, and hope you make it back to land. But then, just as they tried to wrap up and head back, something else caught Jake's attention, another strange noise from below. Not the anchor. Not the cable. But something else entirely. The sea was playing tricks, and whatever was going on down there, it wasn't good. Jake had to make a call. Should they stick around and figure out what was happening or cut their losses and get home before something worse happened? The crew waited for his decision, each of them knowing that the wrong move could mean more than just losing crabs, it could mean losing more lives. Meanwhile, the Wizard's captain was furious. He knew his ship had barely escaped a collision, and his frustration boiled over as he shouted into the radio, questioning Jake's decisions. The two captains exchanged words, but the tension was clear. There was no room for error, not in these conditions, and definitely not when lives were on the line. The Bering Sea wasn't forgiving, and neither were the men who sailed it. The crew thought the worst was over, but another storm was already coming, one that would push their strength and courage to the edge. Back on the Wizard, the crew dealt with the aftermath of the near collision. The captain tried to calm his men down, explaining that they'd done the best they could under the circumstances. It was a close call, but they had avoided a complete disaster, at least for now. But the real storm wasn't just outside. It was also in the minds of the crew, who now had to face the fact that their job was more dangerous than they ever wanted to admit. Every man there knew that the sea didn't play favorites. Today, it was Jake's crew. Tomorrow, it could be theirs. The calm that followed didn't last long. Another wave hit, and this time, it almost took Jacob, one of Jake's deckhands, overboard. He managed to grab onto the railing just in time, pulling himself back on deck, but it was too close. Jacob's face was pale, his hands shaking, but he forced a smile. That's what they did. They laughed off the fear. Because if you didn't, it would eat you alive. Captain Jake knew it, too. He shouted an apology, but Jacob waved it off, though everyone could see just how shaken he really was. And then came the next challenge. Over on the summer bay, Captain Wild Bill faced his own crisis when a crew member went overboard in the middle of hauling their pots. A man slipped, and before anyone could react, he was in the freezing water. The crew acted fast, pulling him back on board, but the damage was done. The shock of the icy water left the man shivering, barely able to stand. Bill knew that they couldn't stop. They had to keep working. But he also knew they had dodged a bullet. The Bering Sea doesn't often give second chances. Captain Jake, Captain Wild Bill, Captain Keith, and Captain Harley, each of them had faced challenges that week that pushed them to their limits. They'd lost a man, nearly collided, battled the elements, and somehow kept going. It wasn't about the crabs anymore. It was about survival. The Bering Sea is a cruel place, and the men who fish its waters know that better than anyone. They go out there for the thrill, for the money, for the chance to prove themselves. But sometimes, the cost is too high. Captain Jake knew that, as did every other captain who'd been out there long enough. The sea doesn't give second chances. And when it does, you count yourself lucky, and move on.